Mark and Elena had been married for 9 years, living in a quiet suburban home on the northern edge of the city. Their marriage was not a fiery, cinematic romance, nor had it ever been. It was built on something they both believed was far more durable, a comfortable, predictable rhythm. They had a mortgage with a fixed interest rate, a rescued golden retriever named Barnaby, and a system of unspoken compromises that kept their daily existence running smoothly. They knew each other's habits with absolute precision. Mark knew that Elena took her tea with a splash of oat milk and no sugar, and that she needed 20 minutes of silence after coming home from her data analytics job before she was ready to talk about her day. Elena knew that Mark arranged his architectural sketches by project code rather than date, and that he tended to chew on the cap of his pen whenever he was stressed about a deadline. For the past 6 months, however, that familiar rhythm had begun to stutter. It didn't happen overnight, and there were no obvious warning signs. There were no shouting matches, no slammed doors, and no sudden late-night arguments about neglected chores. Instead, the change manifested in much smaller, almost imperceptible ways. Mark, a senior partner at a boutique architectural firm downtown, began taking on more municipal development projects. That, at least, was the explanation he gave. He started coming home at 8 or 9 in the evening instead of 6:30. When he walked through the front door, he carried a faint scent of cold autumn air mixed with an unfamiliar cologne. Something subtle with notes of cedarwood and bitter orange. He would offer Elena a brief, polite smile, kiss her lightly on the cheek, and immediately head to the bathroom to wash his hands and change into lounge clothes. His phone, which had historically sat face down on the kitchen counter while they cooked dinner together, became a constant silent presence in his pocket. Whenever a notification buzzed, he would check it with a swift, practiced movement, his thumb sliding across the screen before tilting it away from Elena's line of sight. Elena was not a suspicious person by nature, nor was she prone to emotional outbursts. Her work required her to analyze large sets of structured data, looking for anomalies and patterns that escaped casual observation. Applied to her personal life, this mindset made her quiet, observant, and deeply analytical. She noticed the changes, recorded them internally, and waited. She noticed how Mark's answers to simple questions had become polished and rehearsed. "How was the client presentation?" she would ask over dinner. "Good, very standard," Mark would reply, cutting his chicken into uniform pieces. "The City Council wants to revise the green space allocation for the West End project. It's going to take a few extra revisions." The answer was informative, logical, and entirely devoid of any personal feeling. He was giving her facts, but he was withholding his presence. Elena sat across from him, sipping her water, feeling a slow, cold realization taking root in her chest. She was gradually being edited out of her husband's internal world. The breaking point arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon in late November. Mark had come home unexpectedly at noon to retrieve a set of printed blueprints he had forgotten on the dining room table. He was in a rush, leaving his laptop open on the kitchen island while he rummaged through his home office. Elena was sitting at the island with her own work laptop, taking a break between video conferences. As Mark hurried back into the hallway, his laptop chime sounded, a soft, double ping indicating an incoming message. Elena didn't intend to spy, but the laptop screen was directly in her line of sight, angled toward her. A small, translucent notification banner hovered in the upper right corner of the display. From Clara, the espresso machine at the downtown studio is finally fixed. You owe me a proper coffee tomorrow morning." The message stayed on the screen for 5 seconds before disappearing into the background. There was no explicit confession in those words, no explicit declarations of love or intimacy. But in the context of the last 6 months, the cedarwood cologne, the late-night municipal meetings, the subtle emotional distance, the message functioned like the final piece of a puzzle sliding into place. Elena didn't scream. She didn't drop her teacup or break into tears. She simply stared at the blank gray desktop wallpaper where the notification had been, feeling a heavy, dull ache spread behind her ribs. Mark came back into the kitchen, buttoning his raincoat. "Found them," he said, holding up a thick cardboard tube. "I have to run. The traffic along the river is going to be terrible." Elena looked up at him. She looked at his posture, the slight tension in his shoulders, and the way his eyes flicked briefly toward his laptop before he snapped it shut and slid it into his leather bag. "All right," she said softly. "Drive carefully." When he left, the silence in the house felt vast and suffocating. Elena closed her laptop, walked into the living room, and sat on the rug next to Barnaby. She rested her hand on the dog's soft, warm back, watching the rain streak down the window pane. She didn't feel rage. She felt an overwhelming sense of fatigue. The mystery was gone, replaced by the quiet, undeniable reality of a quiet betrayal. Mark returned home that evening around 8:15. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a damp, chilly fog that clung to the streetlights. He took off his coat, hung it in the front closet, and walked into the kitchen. Elena was sitting on a high stool at the island, a mug of chamomile tea resting between her hands. The main overhead lights were off, leaving only the soft glow of the under-cabinet lighting illuminating the dark granite countertop. "Hey," Mark said, his voice flat with exhaustion. "It's freezing outside." He reached out to touch her shoulder as he walked past. A routine, effortless gesture. "Mark," Elena said. Her voice wasn't raised, nor was it trembling. It was completely even, carrying the cold weight of a final verdict. He stopped mid-step. "Yeah? Who is Clara?" The silence that fell over the kitchen was immediate and total. The faint hum of the refrigerator felt suddenly amplified. Mark remained frozen for 2 full seconds, his hand hovering near the cabinet handle. Elena watched the color drain from his face. It wasn't the sudden shock of anger. It was the slow, deflating posture of a man who had been carrying an exhausting secret for months and had finally been caught under the spotlight. He slowly pulled out the stool across from her and sat down. He didn't offer a quick lie. He didn't ask her why she was asking, nor did he make a desperate excuse about Clara being a harmless client. "She's an associate from the downtown office," Mark said quietly, looking down at the polished surface of the table. "We were assigned to the municipal redesign back in June." "How long?" Elena asked. "Since August," Mark murmured. 4 months. "Are you sleeping with her?" Mark swallowed hard, his hands clasping together. "Yes." The word hung in the dim room, solid and irrevocable. Hearing it stated clearly didn't hurt more than knowing it, but it made the reality permanent. "Why?" Elena asked. She truly wanted to understand. "We didn't fight. We were okay." Mark looked up, his eyes bloodshot, filled with a mixture of shame and genuine confusion. "That was the problem, Elena. We were just okay. Everything was smooth. Everything was scheduled. We stopped looking at each other. With Clara, it started as late working nights, talking about design, talking about life. It made me feel like I was 25 again. It felt light. There were no bills, no house maintenance, no history. It felt light because it wasn't real, Elena said quietly. It was just a break from your actual life. I know, Mark whispered, resting his face in his hands. I know how pathetic that sounds. I didn't set out to hurt you. I let myself slide into it because it was easy, and I didn't have the courage to stop it. And you didn't have the courage to fix what was slipping here, she added. They sat in the dark kitchen for hours. There were no dramatic screams, no broken dishes, no theatrical weeping. Instead, they had a terrifyingly rational conversation about the decay of their relationship. They dissected how they had slowly drifted into cohabitation rather than partnership, how work stress had turned into emotional avoidance, and how a third person had easily filled the empty spaces they had neglected to tend to. By midnight, the conversation was exhausted. Mark packed a single suitcase with a few suits, shirts, and toiletries. I'll stay at the corporate apartment near the office for a few days, he said, standing by the front door with his coat on. Elena stood in the hallway, her arms crossed over her chest. Okay. Elena, I am so sorry, he said, his voice cracking slightly. I know you are, Mark, she said softly. But sorry doesn't rewrite the last 4 months. He nodded, opened the door, and walked out into the foggy night. The weeks following Mark's departure were marked by a surreal, orderly business. There was no sudden war over assets or angry legal battles. Both Mark and Elena were pragmatic adults who recognized that the marriage was irreparably broken. The trust that had taken 9 years to build had not been shattered in a single explosive event, but eroded slowly, leaving behind a structure too weak to support a life together. They communicated primarily through short, polite emails. Mark hired a lawyer, and Elena hired her own. They agreed to sell the suburban house on Maple Street and split the equity evenly. Mark moved from the temporary corporate apartment into a minimalist one-bedroom high-rise in the city center. Meanwhile, his relationship with Clara faced the immediate, harsh impact of reality. Without the excitement of secrecy, late-night text messages, and stolen moments during work hours, the affair lost its romantic appeal. When brought out into the open air of real life, Mark and Clara discovered that their connection was built almost entirely on shared work stress and the thrill of the forbidden. The heavy guilt of Mark's divorce hovered over every conversation they had. Clara soon realized that Mark was not the smooth, unburdened man she had spent time with at late-night studio sessions. He was a tired, deeply mournful man, grieving the quiet collapse of his long-term life. Within 3 months of Mark moving out, he and Clara ended their relationship by mutual consent. There was no anger, just a quiet acknowledgement that they had been an escape for each other during a difficult time, rather than a foundation for something real. Elena, meanwhile, spent her weekends apartment hunting. She found a sunlit, one-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of an older brick building in the city's eastern district. It had tall windows, hardwood floors that creaked slightly underfoot, and a small balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. Packing up the house on Maple Street was a quiet, methodical process. Elena sorted through 9 years of shared possessions: cookbooks, holiday ornaments, framed prints from vacations in Italy, and stacks of architectural magazines. She kept what felt meaningful to her present self and donated or discarded the rest. When the moving truck finally pulled away, leaving the suburban house empty and silent, Elena put Barnaby into the back seat of her car and drove toward her new neighborhood. She felt a profound sadness, but beneath it lay a subtle, unexpected sense of relief. The constant ambient tension of wondering where her marriage was heading had finally vanished. 10 months after Mark had moved out, They met to sign the final divorce papers. The meeting took place at a notary's office on the 7th floor of an office building downtown. It was a crisp Tuesday morning in October. Outside, yellow leaves were tumbling along the pavements, driven by a cool autumn wind. Elena arrived 10 minutes early. She wore a tailored wool coat over a navy sweater and jeans. Her hair was cut shorter now, falling neatly around her shoulders, and her posture was relaxed and composed. She brought a book with her and read calmly in the waiting area. Mark walked in 5 minutes later. He looked thinner than he used to, wearing a dark gray suit that hung slightly loose on his frame. The dark circles under his eyes spoke of long hours at the office and restless nights in his sterile high-rise. "Hi, Elena," he said, taking a seat across from her. "Hello, Mark," she replied, closing her book. "How have you been?" "Busy," he said with a faint, tired smile. "The city council project was finally approved last week." "Congratulations, I know how much work you put into that." "Thanks." He looked at her, taking in her calm expression and the easy way she held herself. "You look good, Elena. Really good." "I'm doing well," she said simply. The notary called them into a small conference room with a large mahogany table and windows overlooking the city skyline. The process was swift and clinical. Pages were flipped, terms were reviewed, and black ink pens were passed back and forth. Sign here. Initial here. Sign here. With each signature, 9 years of shared legal, financial, and emotional domestic history were systematically dismantled. There was no theatrical drama, no sudden hesitation, and no tears. Just the crisp sound of paper being turned and stamped. When the last page was processed, the notary gathered the documents into a neat stack. "All set, Mr. and Mrs. Vance. Excuse me, Miss Vance. The court will issue the final decree within 2 weeks." They walked out of the building together and stepped onto the busy sidewalk. The rush of morning traffic and the chatter of pedestrians filled the air. "Do you want to grab a quick coffee?" Mark asked, gesturing toward a small cafe down the block. "Just to talk for a minute." Elena looked at him, her eyes clear and honest. "I don't think so, Mark. I think everything that needed to be said was said months ago." Mark paused, his hands sinking into his coat pockets. He looked down at the concrete for a moment, before looking up to meet her eyes. "I really am sorry, Elena, for breaking what we had. I see now how much I took for granted." "I know you are, Mark," Elena said gently. She reached out and patted his arm, a friendly, distant gesture. "And I forgive you. But we were both letting that house go cold long before Clara ever showed up. Take care of yourself." She turned and walked down the steps toward the subway entrance. Mark stood on the sidewalk, watching her wool coat blend into the crowd of commuters, until she disappeared down the stairs. 2 years passed. Life for both of them moved forward in quiet, steady increments. Elena's apartment had become a warm, living home. Sunlight streamed through her kitchen windows every morning, illuminating hanging ivy, shelves of books and ceramic pottery she had learned to make in weekend evening classes. She had been promoted to principal data strategist at her firm, leading a team of 5 analysts. Her personal life had expanded organically. She spent her weekends hiking in the nearby state park with Barnaby, reading on her balcony, and hosting small dinners for friends. 18 months after her divorce was finalized, she met Julian. Julian was 40, a quiet landscape architect who worked with native plants and public park restorations. They met through a mutual friend at an outdoor art exhibition. Their connection grew slowly, grounded in mutual respect, shared values, and clear communication. There were no sudden, overwhelming passions or dramatic gestures. Instead, Julian was a steady, thoughtful presence. He listened intently, spoke honestly about his past, and respected Elena's independence. When they spent weekends together, Elena felt a sense of complete safety, a certainty that nothing was being hidden or left unsaid. Mark spent those 2 years engaging in a very different kind of rebuilding. After his short-lived relationship with Clara ended, he chose to live alone. The experience of his divorce had shaken his self-image. He had always viewed himself as a good, reliable, ethical man. Realizing that he was capable of cowardly deceit had been a painful, necessary shock. He began seeing a therapist every Thursday evening. Through those sessions, he began to understand his tendency to withdraw emotionally whenever life felt routine or overwhelming, seeking validation outside rather than doing the hard work of maintaining internal connections. He focused heavily on his architectural work, but with a changed perspective. He no longer used his desk as a place to hide from his personal life. He learned to cook for himself, took up long-distance running, and gradually developed a small, meaningful circle of friends outside of his professional network. The guilt he felt regarding Elena didn't vanish, but it transformed from a sharp, agonizing regret into a quiet, permanent lesson, a reminder to be present, honest, and accountable in every aspect of his life. 3 years after the divorce papers were signed, on a crisp Sunday morning in early May, Elena walked through the bustling open-air farmers market in the city's central plaza. The air was filled with the smell of fresh sourdough, roasted coffee, and cut flowers. Elena carried a canvas tote bag filled with fresh vegetables and a small bouquet of white ranunculus. Barnaby walked calmly by her side on a leather leash, his muzzle now showing distinct patches of silver-white fur. As she navigated past a fruit stand, she heard a familiar voice call out Barnaby's name. Elena turned. Standing near a flower stall, holding a brown paper bag of fresh bread, was Mark. He looked different. He wore casual clothes, a faded denim jacket, dark trousers, and leather boots. His hair was silvering at the temples, but his eyes were clear, calm, and free of the exhausting tension he had carried years ago. "Mark," Elena said, stopping with a gentle smile. Barnaby immediately trotted over, his tail wagging in slow, heavy sweeps. Mark knelt down on the cobblestones, letting the dog rest his chin on his knee while he scratched him behind his ears. "Hey, buddy," Mark murmured softly. "Look at you, getting distinguished with all that gray." Mark stood up, wiping his hands on his trousers, and looked at Elena. "Hi." "Hi," she replied. "It's good to see you." "You too," Mark said. His tone was warm, devoid of any leftover awkwardness or pain. "How are you doing?" "I'm doing really well," Elena said. "We just moved into a house near the river last month." "We?" Mark asked politely. "Julian and I," Elena explained softly. "He's a landscape designer. We've been together for about a year and a half." Mark nodded, a look of genuine, warm happiness appearing on his face. "I'm really glad to hear that, Elena. Truly, you deserve that." "Thank you, Mark. How are things with you? How's the firm?" "Good," Mark said, adjusting the bag under his arm. "I stepped down from the senior partner track 6 months ago, working fewer hours, taking on smaller historic restoration projects instead of major municipal builds. It's much better for my sanity." "That sounds like a good change," she said softly. They stood together in the middle of the crowded plaza, surrounded by the noise of the market and the warm spring sunlight. The past, the painful discoveries, the late-night kitchen arguments, the cold notary offices, felt very far away. It was a chapter in a book they had both finished reading a long time ago. "Well," Mark said, taking a small step back, "I won't keep you. Give Barnaby an extra treat for me." "I will," Elena smiled. "Take care of yourself, Mark." "You too, Elena." They walked in opposite directions, blending smoothly back into the crowd of morning shoppers. Neither of them turned back to look. Their lives were like two parallel lines now, moving forward in their own distinct directions, shaped by the past, but entirely focused on the quiet, clear future ahead.